Okay, this is part two of some of the disturbing things this man says. You'll see him in the bottom left-hand corner. So why he's so successful, he actually mixes things that are factual and evidenced with fantasy. And so that's how every sort of confusion, any act of confusion happens, is you've got to take something that's actually based in reality, but then you mix it up with fantasy, because that's how you trap people. And he does this beautifully. So you're about to hear him say something that actually is factually correct, and then he messes it up and mixes it up with something that's unrelated. And it's got nothing to do with reality, and it's more slavery. And so just like anything, one drop of lie in a bucket of truth is no longer the truth. It's either the whole truth or it's not. As soon as there's one deception in there, it's no longer the truth. Just like strychnine in water. You cannot call it water as soon as there's one drop of strychnine in it. And this guy's a master at that. So let's listen.
I lean heavily on this document here, the Declaration and the Constitution of the United States.
Now, remember I said he's a big proponent of the US Constitution, yet not once has he understood that the US Constitution came from the 1215 Magna Carta. The very men that put it together drew from English common law, that whole common law system in England. The same common law that he believes he's not responsible to learn about, right? But then he wants to talk about, being a proponent of the US Constitution. Massive contradictions, guys.
But in time, it gets distorted to the point, say, for example, and this is important, where your Supreme Court now becomes the arbiter of constitutionality, but that's completely flawed. That way you control not injustice as you control the country.
There he's correct. Same with the High Court in Australia. Absolutely correct, right? Is if you got people that are paid by government, they're selected by Parliament, right, or politicians, political parties, whichever, to actually decide on matters of what is constitutional, what is not, you're basically running a slavery system. So on that part is correct, right? And then you're going to hear him say the thing about where sovereignty is derived from.
Yeah, this is the way they like it, but it's
or
wrong.
Law, should I say.
And I've paid very careful attention to that, to remind the people that the people being the source of law, by definition, they are the ultimate arbiters of constitutionality or not. Now,
okay, so there he's now saying that people are the ultimate arbiters of what is constitutional. Now, the problem is how he actually expresses that happens. All right, so I'm just going to fast forward it so I don't have to listen to all the other stuff, and then I'll be right back. Okay, here it comes, guys. It's going to drop a ripper here. Here we go.
What every Australian must come out, every American, every human on this planet, eventually, the goal is this: you are sovereign, and whatever the hell happens to you, it's in your power to fix. Now, there are mechanisms that we're going to put in place, certainly in Australia, and that's what we've been working hard at. Mechanisms in place to ensure that that power is genuinely pushed down to the lowest possible level, to the individual, with recall elections, things that are common to you, excuse me, ideas that are very common to you, but exciting here. Every time I do a talk and I say to people, imagine if you had the power to get 50% plus one of the local electorate or whatever to sack your premier, prime minister, whatever. Would you like that? And that cheer in the room goes up. You can't settle them down for another 20 minutes.
All right, now you watch the guy in the middle go do a fist pump right in the air. He's like, yeah, now we have power. Now, if all sovereignty derives from the individual, right, all law, as he says, derives from the individual, why does it require 50% plus one, right? How is that the individual in power? How does that express that? Because is that not waiting for the lazy majority to figure stuff out? And how's that working out for us so far? What's new there? So on one hand, he's saying that law derives from each individual, right? Well, where's your power if you're waiting for your neighbors to get it? When's that ever going to happen? Like, you got to really think about that, guys, right? That is one of the biggest mistakes that most people make. They think that's what democracy is, 50 plus one, right? That is just total slavery. Someone like the lazy majority who doesn't think deeply and clearly about, rights, that just takes their comfort for granted and just does what they, have to do. They're really good at following orders, and now all of a sudden just going to be really good at working stuff out. That's what it's going to be able to do. We've got to wait for all of them to come together and fully get it. Well, how long is it taking for us to get it right now? And we're like sucking it hard, and people still don't get it, and they're losing family members. and they're really ill and they still don't get it. So what's going to change, right? Why would you run a system like that if you haven't learned that that's not ever worked out ever in history at this point, in this juncture, when we're that far down the well, right? If you can't figure that out now, what's going to make life different for you after that? This is terrifying, guys. A system where the individual has power cannot be 50 plus 1, right? Because if we waited for every single individual to figure something out, or enough of them, we're right back where we started. There needs to be a system where the individual, separate from everyone else, who has a higher order of consciousness, has capacity to see things others cannot, can actually have influence and show others what they can't see. So others can now start to learn and grow in their consciousness. That's the true nature of a leader, not someone who thinks that they can get in power and like confuse people with old ways of doing things, who was a really good order follower. Because if you've watched some of the things he says when we start running the school system, kids are going to be made to do sports, more dictation. Like all this guy knows is order following and order giving. That's it. He shows it in very few people. They get seduced, so they can't see the forest for the trees. This is the terrifying part. The ones who follow the movement and they think all these patriots have got it all worked out, they really don't understand principle. This is the terrifying bit, right? So if we actually want to do something different and live free, this has to be understood, guys. You wait for a group of people to make a collective decision that can't even get along in their own households, we're doomed. That's not democracy, guys. That's slavery. So that's what he's offering you. Now I'm going to go back and I'm going to show you what Derek says about the law of war. And he makes a really, really good point here. But then he just overlooks it, right? It's to show you that if you're going to wait for the military to actually do something in your name, you're done. And so I'll be right back with that one. All right, so here we go. Let's listen to our friend Derek Johnson, what he says here, and he's going to drop a real good one. Here we go.
And Americans also need to know this, that is what a military occupancy does. When the federal government, there's two powers in the U.S. It's real simple, federal government, military. And I don't think enough people understand that the military and the federal government are separate entities. That is why the military.
So what he's saying, there's only two powers. There's the government, which is meant to be a system of service, remember? Administration, they're administering the will of the people. But no, he's calling them a power. And then he's calling the military another power. So did I not just show you the oath that the military is supposed to take? That means they are what? Public servants. So they don't have power. They are meant to be directed by we the people. That's the true nature of it, right? And soon I'm going to show you the actual true meaning of what a military is and the whole system. And then you're going to hopefully understand why this is going back into slavery, this whole thing that they're selling you. But anyway, let's listen on.
Military Justice Act clarified that. They're separate entities. At any one point, does a president or Congress go against the Constitution, the military can step in at any time. They haven't done it in history.
There you go. He just said it. They haven't done it in history. So right there, he's telling you that you are going to spend your taxes paying for something that doesn't even serve you when you need it. So it's never happened in history, right? So what was the point of everything he just said? Does it not delegate your power out to someone else who's not you? How is that you being sovereign? That's what this guy in the middle at the top here is advocating for. He's advocating for that. Now, he's just told you it's ineffective. It doesn't actually work. But he doesn't look into it. Why? I wonder why it didn't. Wonder why we didn't do that. What's up with all that, right? If the people were actually sovereign, they would never need a military. That's the terrifying part that people don't understand. That's the really scary bit. Because we would never be putting ourselves in situations where we're going to go to war with anybody. And I'm talking about a global system like that. It's only because tyrants take over, make sure that we remain ignorant with our comforts and we just accept what we're given as truth. And these guys are doing the same thing. They're just perpetuating the old model, but all they're doing is they're putting themselves in a position where they might get some benefit out of it.
And they should have, but that's where we are. And that's where Donald Trump, that's when he said it January 2021 at one of his speeches. I've pissed off a lot of rich people, right? And I got to go away for a little while. Well, that's why, because this is a massive operation. the military stepped in when the federal government's in a continuity government, meaning all three branches of government are in a cog. That means the Constitution is paused. And the law of war manual is...
There you go. So what they're saying is that you as an individual, right, who has supposedly got power over yourself, doesn't have that anymore because it's between one version of public servants against another. Have a think about that. That's total madness. That's what this guy is telling you is the right way to go about things. And this is why we're still enslaved, guys, because we don't understand. They're all meant to be public servants. So how can they fight it out amongst each other on our behalf? No, we need to be in charge of everything they do, because otherwise it's not a system of service. It's dictatorship. It's despotism. And what he's explaining to you here is despotism. When have you ever heard Donald Trump talk about trial by jury? When have you ever heard Rudy Giuliani say anything about it? What about Lindell? What about, who was that female that I can't think of right now? That's supposed to be, to do with all the tribunals. And then there's the other guy that I can't think of with the cowboy hat. None of them have ever mentioned trial by jury, ever. Yet that's the true nature of how you keep a constitution in check, that you keep your system, your administrative system, as public servants, so they never step out of line. Because in the correct functioning democratic rule of law, we have the right to private prosecution of any public servant who steps out of line, whether they be police officer, bureaucrat, MP, military, any of them. Now, if we all knew that, we would not require any of the measures that they're talking about. And if people like Donald Trump were, holding office as a system of service, as the highest, most senior public servant, if he was in his role of serving the people, would he not be educating you about that? Is that not a service to the people for them to understand how the correct system of governance is supposed to work? Well, when have they ever said that? Big questions that need answering.
The quote-unquote Constitution, if you will, if you want to call it that, it's the military's Constitution, and the military is in the military occupancy. And
so have a think about that. Now I'm going to play you something from Larkin Rose, which is really on point. I have to actually go away and stop myself from laughing because I actually find this hilarious. So I'll be right back. So here's the video from Larkin Rose, someone I have a lot of time for. I've learnt heaps from him, especially the way he articulates things very succinctly and very basic language. This is from his 3-part series called The Island. And this is part 3. And this is where he gets really specific about the whole system of governance, what we've been running, what these guys are actually talking you back into doing. You're going to be a good slave again. And you'll see why once I play this. Anyway, I've got to try not to stop laughing because he just does it so well that I actually find it hilarious.
But let's say we find out, there's an island nearby and it has 500 people on it. Like, they way outnumber us. They don't know, we don't know anything about them. We just, saw them out in their canoes or something. Okay, so what about that? You tell me, what about that? Are you going to go, that's why we need to appoint a master and have an enforcer and have him rob and conscript all of us to form an army? Is that what you would say?
Now, how many times do you hear them referring to Donald Trump as commander-in-chief, right? So that's what he is. That's what they're glorifying. This is what they're leading you straight back into, guys.
What you would believe in this setting? I'm guessing no, it isn't. Now, if it is, feel free to say so. Now, I can point out the silliness of that. Like the ridiculousness of saying, I want a giant, violent, authoritarian monster, whether in this setting or in normal life, to have a big military to protect me. Okay, so you want somebody who isn't you to have massive firepower and personnel and machinery to engage in violent combat, and then you hope they're going to use that to protect you instead of to subjugate you, even though never in the history of the world has that happened. Every government, like the American people, get robbed and terrorized and caged and harassed by their own government more than by any other gang or any other government. So, luckily we have this gigantic military. Oh, does it stop you from being taken over and have a huge chunk of your paycheck stolen and every aspect of your life controlled? No, it literally works for the gang that does that to you. So I can point out how silly and ridiculous it is to advocate a giant authoritarian power over you in the hopes that it'll protect you from being dominated and subjugated, because those other people might come over. So we better make a group here that can dominate and rob us. That's ridiculous. But instead of me just pointing that out, I'll ask you, do you think that would help? Okay, there's 500 people over there. We don't know what they're like. Let's enslave all of us to this guy and his enforcer and let him conscript us. Is that what you would do in this setting? Or is that just your excuse for wanting to go back to believing what you already believed? For trying to dismiss all this and go, well, okay, that's fine and good. It sounds like good principles. But in the real world, there's big armies and stuff more scary. And I'm going to jump back to advocating subjugation of mankind in the name of protection, which is utterly ridiculous. Well, let's say we find out.
Whoops. So there you go. Couldn't have put it better if I tried. So basically, you think about it, right? Every single war, all the PTSD, how many times have Australian soldiers been sent away to places that have got nothing to do with Australian security? Now, this guy, this Ricardo Bosi guy, he spent his career doing that, going to all these foreign places that got nothing to do with Australian security. But we'll have a bunch of excuses. And if he's sworn to actually protect the people of this country, why is he listening to politicians? Why didn't he actually pay attention to that actual oath that he swore to, right? And found out what it actually meant before he started following orders. This is not a man who actually stands behind the word sovereignty or leadership. All the evidence is there. You just need to see it for what it is. You need to be able to separate from your emotional attachment, because what these people do, right? They sell you a story about their capacity to have this courage. Do you know what I mean? That they're fearless. You know, they'll say these really emotive things like, what's that statement he loves about you're not fighting for what's ahead of you, you're fighting for what's behind you. You know, the really good capturing stuff, right? But then you don't pay attention to all the contradictions they're laying out. So anyone who becomes a personality, right? What you do is you have an emotional attachment to them, right? So you stop discerning what they're actually saying. You start trusting without really being clear on what it is they're saying. That is one of the most dangerous ways that you can be enslaved. And these guys are doing it, guys. That's got to be right in the center of your face now. If you can't see it, then that's on you. I don't know how much clearer I can make it. Now I'm just going to show you some definitions to finish off on what sovereignty is and the opposite of what it is. All right, so I'll be right back. I've done sovereignty heaps of times. Sovereign means one who's above the ownership, rulership or control of another. Right, so not a subject or slave. I've done it heaps, so I'm just going to give you another slide here. Sovereignty is true self-ownership, self-mastery, self-control, self-discipline, self-love. Self-discipline actually means your capacity to be able to discern fact from fiction, to be able to tell when your emotions are driving your decisions versus to your conscience, right? They're all parts of self-discipline. They're all parts of self-mastery. They're all parts of self-ownership. And very few people that I've witnessed can do that, right? They allow their emotions to attach and then start twisting things because they want to stay comfortable with what those emotions that they like, right? And that's how people are controlled without knowing that it's happening to them. So sovereignty is a diametric opposition to slavery, as to be sovereign means you are the ruler of yourself through mastery of your own consciousness. Like I said, that's your capacity to be able to differentiate and discern nuance, guys, and how we are controlled very subtly. And that is a skill that's lacking, sadly, for the majority. Even those ones, especially the ones who call themselves awake. That's the biggest tragedy here. Now I'm going to show you the opposite of what sovereignty is. Okay, so the opposite of sovereignty is confusion. So confusion is a state of internal anarchy. That means that there's no ruler. Anarchy means absence, archy ruler, so absence of a ruler. So the mind is ruled by fear and ignorance. So ignorance is active refusal of objective truth, right? So that means you basically don't understand base principles that exist in nature. You just don't get it. A state of opposition within one's own consciousness. So it's opposition, right? By being torn apart from within in such a way that the three aspects of your consciousness, your thoughts, emotions, and actions, are in perpetual contradiction. So what have I said this guy's been doing? He's been totally contradicting himself, right? So he's in a perpetual state of confusion, selling himself as someone who's in control and is a master, etc. It's only because the majority of people who are listening to him are just as confused. They don't have that capacity for discernment, that he's been taken as someone who actually has some kind of understanding and some leadership qualities, because they don't even know the definition of it. This is the tragic part. So we're still in that old way of seeing things, guys, believing we're moving into a new world, yet very few people are actually capable of grasping the true nature of what it is to be sovereign, because they don't, unfortunately, have the capacity to discern the difference between a judgment and discernment. They're two entirely different things. And the majority of people fall into the space of being in judgment all the time. And all judgment is just a repeating of what you know. It's not learning anything you don't know. And that's why we're here, where we are. So just to show you the natural law, I guess the breakup of where everything sits, and then that should do it. Here we have it, the one in the middle. You've got the positive expression of natural law, and then you've got the negative, right? So sovereignty, that's internal monarchy. That means when you are the ruler of yourself. And then confusion is internal anarchy. It means when no one rules from within. That means the openness to being ruled from outside is there. And that's what these guys are teaching, I'm afraid. And you'll hear them say the opposite, yet you watch them in action. It's not what people say, it's what they do, right? And they have not done their research. Even though they've been prompted to, they refuse to. And you think about that. Someone who refuses to actually understand common law is now going to make themselves some kind of authority on how we can conduct our lives in a way where we're going to peacefully coexist. Yet the very center of every interaction is all common law. And the thing about common law is that laws are made by the people through their trials and tribulations, and they're executed through the independence of a jury to decide on whether someone's guilty or not guilty through a system of 12 by minimum, through their conscience, right? Because the conscience is neutral. It's not operating from bias. This is where we grow and expand as people, because we're in a system like that. We are in a position where we need to confront our biases, because our decisions are so heavily weighted to someone else's suffering that that's going to get our full attention, right? You're never going to hear that from him or any of these other so-called patriots, right? They're just going to keep pushing the same old narrative, but they're just going to put different people in charge, right? So it's different people running the same slavery structure. So just bear that in mind next time you start listening to these guys.